Welcome back to Communicology. Have you ever wondered why Hollywood just can't tell a simple story? Why it always has to deviate and go off into the weeds and ruin their own projects? Before we jump in, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and also to like and share this video. And leave a comment of your favorite IP that has been destroyed by Hollywood. So anyway, we see Hollywood all the time taking movies from books and other stories that we've come to love, and then they create their version and we watch it and we think this is nothing like it at all, and we kind of get sick and tired of seeing it, and so we stop going to movies and we start thinking, well, there must be something terribly wrong with the movie industry, and there is, and it's the lack of ability to tell a story. Now, in a previous episode, I talked about the problem that they've had with Star Wars when they took all of the expanded universe canon material that it was developed, while George Lucas was doing his work, and they took it and threw it into the trash bin and said that's no longer canon. So they had all that material they just chunked because they wanted to tell their own stories, which is fine. If you own the IP, you have the right to do that kind of a thing. But the question is, why would you? The thing about an IP, an intellectual property, that is so valuable, why it's worth so much money, is because it has a built-in fan base. So you take any book that has ever been written, there are groups of people who love those books and who love a certain author or a certain genre, and they want to see those books transformed and brought to life. Now, the blessing of books, of course, is that as you're reading them, your imagination brings them to life, which is a great thing. But, sometimes we want to see it on the screen. So we ask and beg and plead that Hollywood would take that cool book that we love and put it on the screen. And for decades, they did. They did a pretty good job of doing it. And then we would, as nerds, argue whether or not, a certain set design looked right, or whether the dialogue was just right, or whether this actor should have played this character, and all that good fun stuff that we wrestle with over movies. And that's perfectly fine. That's all part of culture. And it's something that we love to do because, whenever you read a book, you envision that someone would look a certain way. And when they adapt it to a movie, well, it's sometimes like the person has red hair instead of brown, and we're shaking our fists and saying why they're supposed to be a brunette. And we wrestle with those things. No big deal there because, again, that's part of culture. But when you move into current Hollywood, especially Hollywood of the past decade, they've been working very, very hard to deconstruct stories, to deconstruct fan bases. Now, the reason is fairly insidious. It's they want to get rid of the fan base. And if you don't successfully get rid of that fan base, they want to change and teach that fan base. Have you noticed over the past decade that Hollywood movies have gotten far more preachy? Almost feel like you're going to a lecture. And I don't mean like a college lecture, which could be fun and entertaining and you can learn things. I mean like where you're in trouble and they're lecturing you and telling you how wrong you are and how your thoughts are wrong and how you've always been wrong and your betters are here now to tell you how to think. That's very much where we are with current Hollywood. So they'll take the most ridiculous, pathway through a story instead of picking the one that's already there. Now, why would they do this? Well, you'd think the biggest thing would be that tanking sales would eventually teach them a lesson. Well, a lot of their work is being underwritten by people who do have the money to kind of push that agenda, and they're willing to take losses to continue pushing the culture in the direction that they want to see it pushed. And that, of course, is the dark part of the whole story. Because in ye olden days, before that money was being pumped into Hollywood, if they lost money, they stopped doing it because, wow, we shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake. Let's reel that back in and try something else. Now, and you wonder, can they keep sustaining loss after loss after loss? I mean, we're talking in some cases $100, $100, $200 million losses, which is mind-boggling to think about losing. Those are, considerably more movies that could have been made, but they're continually tanking their own work. Why? Because to them, that message of social change, social engineering, is far more important than making a profit. Besides, if you're underwritten by other people, the profit loss issue kind of just disappears. So it's just about hammering that message home. Now, you look at IPs and look how badly destroyed they've been, and you wonder how long they could keep doing this. Well, the question is how long can they keep looking up new IPs and ruining them? I mean, I've talked before about Star Wars, how it's been killed. It's an absolute dead zombie franchise. So it's done. You look at Star Trek, it's been driven into the ground. It's a dead franchise, and it's probably going to be put on the shelf now for several years because it's dead. I mean, the last Star Trek project was so bad in all aspects, storytelling, production value, everything, that it's very easily killed what was left of that franchise. Marvel is fairly well dead. They're trying everything they can to resurrect it, but it's resurrecting a zombie. It's not resurrecting a glorious, lovely figure. It's a zombie, and it's dead. The Terminator franchise, dead. You look at what they've done with the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's work. What Amazon has done, it's dead. And then you look at how they've ruined things like Game of Thrones and other things that they keep trying to push agendas and stuff into. Dead. I mean, you can just go through story after story. I mean, there's a few they haven't touched yet. Thank goodness they haven't touched Back to the Future yet, because that's a great franchise. Please don't touch that one, Hollywood. But they would if they could. And you look at any of those other type things that are out there. I mean, the DC universe, it's dead, and it's a sad thing to see, because all of these beloved franchises that you grew up with are being destroyed systematically and just turned into powder. And they were willing to do that, destroy their own capital for the sake of trying to push this message home, which for most people on the planet sounds like a bizarre, crazy thing to do, but they keep doing it. So it's not totally bizarre in that aspect. So now, when you look at like how you develop a TV show or develop a movie, you look at the idea, you start off with some kind of source material. So you have a book. Typically it's a book, that someone has written, whether it was 10 years ago or 1,000 years ago or whatever, and they take the book and then they turn it and adapt it into what's known as a screenplay, because a book is written to speak to your mind and be readable, whereas a screenplay is meant to be a development of how that movie will play through and what it would look like, when you start working into the scripting aspect and you have everyone's lines and how they're going to say it, what each shot will look like, all that kind of stuff. And that's where you start seeing all the major tinkering happening in this first shift. And somebody at some point, whether it's a director or producer or some screenplay artist, decides we're going to change this and we're going to modify it. Now you look at the ways they've modified it in the last decade, you'll see very clearly what they've done. Like, for example, the biggest thing is the damage to the hero's journey. The hero's journey in storytelling, you have a regular everyday person minding their own business, something jarring happens and sets them on the course of the journey. Along the journey, they come across allies, and we start introducing enemies, or the enemy, depending on how it's laid out. But you have enemies. And you also come across, you have typically some kind of older, wiser mentor who helps shepherd the person along. And there's all kinds of setbacks and wins and setbacks and wins as they continue to go up that hero's journey, like climbing a mountain. And eventually you get to the big, the climax of the movie. That's where the big final fight is, or the final challenge to be conquered. And then the denouement at the end, where you just wrap up everything, resolve everything. In today's world, set up the sequel, all that kind of stuff that goes on. Well, along the way, that what matters is it's not a straight line to the top. It's a jagged line, which means there's all kinds of setbacks. There's some wins and there's some setbacks, and there's a lot of time, there's a lot of doubt, and there's a lot of stakes that are being elevated. In today's movies, there aren't too many stakes. There's not too much doubt. In fact, you can tell right away when you watch a movie who's going to live and who's not going to live, because they're out there working to push this message, and the message is typically around identity politics. So you'll have someone who's maybe a woman instead of a man put into a character, someone who's they'll put it in a black actor for a white character, and they'll do all these changes. And maybe someone who's on the LGBTQ spectrum, and they'll put them in there, and they'll do all that kind of stuff. And those people are going to be untouchable. And you'll see an army of indispensable white people who will get killed all the time and killed off and ruined. And the people who the heroes are, these newly reformed characters, they don't have setbacks. And if they do, they're small. And they don't need a mentor. What they need is everyone to get out of their way. And eventually the big climax is them realizing that they had the power in themselves all along. That only if they just believed in themselves, they could do it. Instead of, like sucking it up and finding the courage, finding the grit, and to make it happen. I mean, you can see this very clearly in the original Star Wars trilogy. You can see it in the early, like phase 1, phase 2, even phase 3 of Marvel. But it's gone away to the point of like, when you have someone come on the screen, who's going to live, that nothing's going to happen. So when Rey shows up in Star Wars, like she starts off just an average person, and all of a sudden stuff lands on her doorstep and she has to start reacting. Well, guess what? She's awesome at everything. You hear the term Mary Sue. Well, Mary Sue is the whole idea of somebody who's a woman who follows that hero's journey with, it's like a straight bullet line to, I'm a regular person, something happens, I just rock it up to being awesome as soon as I realize I am awesome. And Rey follows that path. She never has any kind of problems. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday, and they talked about the idea that, if you think about it, nobody in the Disney sequel movies loses a limb. I mean, it's almost a trope for George Lucas to lop off somebody's limb. That's quite a setback if you lose an arm or a leg, and it happens like crazy in the original 6 Star Wars movies that George Lucas made. Someone's always losing limbs. So oh my goodness, something bad's going to happen. And and that's how how it works. And you really wonder as you're watching the original Star Wars movies, especially when you're watching things like Empire Strikes Back. It ends pretty dark, and you're thinking like, boy, they're on the ropes. Are they really going to be able to pull this off? And then even as you're going through Empire, through Return of the Jedi, you start seeing a lot of times, and you're saying, I don't know. I hope they're going to pull this off, but boy, things look pretty dim here. And they keep putting you through it. There's jagged ups and downs throughout the movie. So when you get to the end, it is a celebration because they did it. And, you watch, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Ring trilogy. I mean, my goodness, setback after setback after setback. Even the final situation where you see, Frodo gets his finger bitten off because the ring turns him evil, and Gollum bites off his finger. I mean, we're at the end of the movie, and he's still losing parts. And then next thing you know, they manage to destroy the ring, and then they're laying on the rocks with the lava pouring around them, and you're still wondering, are they going to get out of this? Or are they going to die on the hillside as heroes? What's going to happen? And you're always left in that, like, my goodness, what a jagged thing. And ironically, as they're climbing up a jagged, rocky Mount Doom. So that's the whole idea that you see in these stories, but they've been turned into just bullet lines, just straight lines to the get to the end. And you can see that whenever they brought in Captain Marvel, boom, let's do a gender swap it and just do a straight line. And you see all of these things that just come into play and just absolutely tanks the storytelling. And that's the biggest problem, is whenever you are, you have this willing suspension of disbelief. That's the whole idea of whenever you are willing to suspend your disbelief. I don't think that's real. I don't think that's possible, but I'm willing to shut that part off of my brain just so I can enjoy the movie. You have to do that with, say, like with a lot of Marvel movies, because there are so many plot holes in Marvel movies. They just, like, all of a sudden they need a thing, they snap their fingers, and the thing is there. Like, oh, come on, that's not possible. But we need it to happen, so let's just go ahead and do it. Okay, I'm willing to put up with that. A basic thing like Iron Man's suit. How can it fly for so long without any fuel? Like, where's this big, like, you took a regular jet plane, it holds, thousands of gallons of fuel. How does the Iron Man suit fly? Well, they just do it, and you just accept it, and you're just whatever. It's cool. It looks neat. So that's the big that's a big problem that you have is getting past some of those plot holes, and you just have this willing suspension of disbelief. The problem is you can only suspend so much before they start jarring you so badly that you can't suspend it any further. The movie The Odyssey is going through this right now. They cast a black woman as Helen of Troy, who's in the book is listed as white and as Greek. So it's like the Greek people are very mad, saying you haven't cast any Greek people in this movie, and Helen of Troy is not Greek at all. She's a black woman. What in the world? And it just shakes you. And this is supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world, whose face launched 1,000 ships, and the woman they cast is maybe a 6. At least find the most beautiful woman that you can find. Don't find an average person and do it just for the sake of, hey, we're shaking up things. Haha, take that. But again, that's such a jarring thing, that you can't process it. You can't say, I'm willing to go with you and ignore that part of the story. It's just not how it happens. So anyway, so they have a story, and it's already written out. And of course, the Odyssey is a very, very old tale, thousands of years old. You have it. Just tell that story. It's a great story. It's a great story because it's been told for thousands of years. If it was a lousy story, it would have fallen away a long time ago. But it's a great story, so just tell that one. Why do you have to change it? Why do you have to add a twist? They did this in the Noah movie with Russell Crowe and Emma Watson. They had to add in all kinds of extra stuff to make it Hollywood. Why? It's the story of the flooding of the world. Is that not dramatic enough for you? Oh, no, we have to Hollywood it up a bit and add in all kinds of other stuff. Just tell the story, man. I mean, it's such a good story. Why would you need to add more? But that's Hollywooding it up versus, hey, we need to change and make people think differently about how they see things. And that's, the problem of the last decade. Now, the other thing, too, is you look at, you go from the book to the screenplay to the storyboarding. Storyboarding is where, if you've ever opened a comic book, you get a good idea of what storyboarding is. Basically, you're drawing sketches of what each shot will look like. A comic book is a perfect example of that. And if you need to figure out, well, what does a person look like? Well, comic books, regular books don't necessarily, they might describe it to you, but might not have it drawn in detail. Comic books have that. So here is the comic book, and we'll open it up, and we can see what this person looks like. We can see what this superhero's outfit looks like, and you go through all of these different things, and you have it all drawn out for you, shot by shot, with most of the dialogue in there. Usually in comic books, of course, it's limited dialogue because of space, but you have it all done out for you. So again, they take that and throw that in the garbage too. And they come up with uniforms or outfits or anything that they have, any kind of costumes, whatever, and they just do their own spin on it. Why would you do that? Because that's what they do to try to get you to believe their story that they're going to teach you. So you might have a story that tells, from this angle, and it might depict people in a certain way, and you're like, ooh, I don't want to do that, and they change it and tweak it and just basically affect the whole story. And you'll see that kind of thing come into play. A perfect example of a comic book superhero coming to life, and it has been successfully in previous movies, but not in this current era, is Blade. Wesley Snipes, as Blade is supposed to be this wonderful, violent, vampire hunter. So he's a black guy. So there's no race swap even needed. So great. You just find a black guy and stick it in there. Well, in modern Hollywood, you can't have a guy by themselves. And so they have to have a woman come along. In fact, the latest Blade movie, it was basically killed because they were trying to figure out how to tell a Blade story. And Kevin Feige even said, well, we can't just have a black guy in leather with a blade fighting, killing vampires. It's like, that's exactly what the story is, though. So what they tried to do in that story is they diminished Blade, and they had 4 women who are part of the story to basically, shepherd the story along and be the true heroes. Why? Why would you do such a thing? That's why that movie died, because once rumors got out of what they were doing to it, it killed it. And it was a terrible thing. Henry Cavill with The Witcher, famously, he wanted the Witcher to be lore accurate. And the directors said, no, we're going to do the modern audience thing. And we're going to diminish the male characters and make them reliant on the female characters. And Henry Cavill said, I'm out, and checked out of that series. It's one of those things that they keep trying to change everything when they already have the story in place. They already have the fan base in place. So if you're ever wondering why they keep doing this, it's because they either despise the fan base, which they despise what you believe, but they despise the fan base, or they're trying to re-educate you. They've got the stories. They've got tons of stories. I mean, look how many times Hamlet has been told in different ways. And if you look at the Odyssey, just watch Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, if you want to see a more modern retelling of that. But it's got, a lot of great acting in it, and a really cool soundtrack too. So, but you look at the last decade or so, and you can see how they've been doing this. You can go back to Patient Zero, basically is considered widely to be the Ghostbusters 2016 reboot with all women, and it wasn't funny. It had all kinds of awkward dialogue, and it just didn't go anywhere. It died quickly, and an ugly death at that. And then you have Supergirl that's coming out, and guess what? She's not noble. She's not, wonderful. She's messy. They described her literally as messy and someone who's dealing with trauma. It's like, we don't want to watch a superhero movie where they're just messy dealing with trauma. We need heroes, and people in Hollywood don't know how to write heroes. I mean, here's your chance to have a woman hero. They don't know how to write them. They haven't read, they haven't seen previous movies, they don't know the source material, they hate the lore, so they want to do their own telling, and it's usually self-insert after self-insert after self-insert. You watch The Acolyte, and the showrunner flat out said that it's all like her experiences just being pumped into it. What a terrible TV show that turned out to be, because who wants to watch someone else's continually lousy life and their trauma? We want to aspire to things. We want stories that pull us up and to uplift us. That's why Top Gun Maverick did so well. That's why Spider-Man movies typically do so well, because it's a story of a regular guy, even Peter Parker's just a regular guy, and who do, extraordinary things. Just when everything's on the line, they're still willing to go out there and do extraordinary things. And that's what people love. Men love it. Women love it. Straight people love it. Gays love it. But they insist we have to change everything so we can have all these inserts in the movies, so we can race swap, gender swap, sexuality swap, do all these swaps so people can feel like they're part of the experience too, when they were already there and part of it. The original Star Wars, everybody loved it. They didn't have to change anything. Everybody already loved it. So why they had to change it and come out with their t-shirts that said the Force is female, no one's going to understand. It is going to be probably the costliest movie blunder in the history of film. Thanks, Chris Gore. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.